Jehovah's Witnesses are 100% a cult. They are one of the OG cults. There's a good cult documentary called A&E, Cults and Extreme Beliefs. You can see an episode on Children of God there, which is a cult I grew up in. And they have a good episode on Jehovah's Witnesses and all of the damage, especially sexual abuse, that they cause to the children who are born and raised in Jehovah's Witnesses. Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons are one of the reasons that people in cult education have worked so hard to get the concept of small, that a cult has to be small, out of the popular concept. People still, of course, think that. You know, I used to say nobody has the clout to call Mormons a cult, but I actually think that I do. Same with Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm Danielle, a scholar of cults, extreme groups, and extremely bad leadership, and I wrote a book called Uncultured about growing up in the Children of God religious cult and then going into the U.S. Army cult, and you can get autographed copies of that here. Much like me, lots of Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, and other kids from cults tend to go into the military and actually do quite well. This is a little bit of an article called When Leaving a Religion is Like Abandoning a Cult, and it is about Amber Scora's memoir, Leaving the Witness, Exiting a Religion and Finding a Life. So it says, Amber Scora's memoir, Leaving the Witness, is the account of a third-generation Jehovah's Witness, I was also a third-generation cult member, finally able to muster the emotional and intellectual resources necessary to leave the sect once she reaches her 30s. As a freedom story, hers is of particular note and value because the Jehovah's Witnesses are a secretive and self-contained organization, one of the things that makes you a cult. Known to most only as cheerful proselytizers who knock on doors and refuse to celebrate birthdays. Established in the 1870s by Charles Taze Russell, this millenarian movement rejected Christian doctrines it deemed extra-textual, including Trinitarianism and hell, instead preaching a dubious return to apostolic Christianity. Like many 19th century Christian denominations, it reacted to the scientific age with intensified literalism and supernatural faith claims, granting Scripture the ultimate authority. As the Witnesses consolidated and organized, they formed a strict hierarchy topped by an 8-member, all-male governing body. And Jehovah's Witnesses like to say that we can't be a cult because we don't have a single leader. And we have a term for that, and it's called charisma by proxy. And you absolutely can have a council of elders running a cult. Okay, so they have the all-male governing body, a prolific and wealthy publishing empire, and a following of 8 million members who actively proselytize, warning of an imminent Armageddon. Which is also funny because they also say that only 144,000 people can go to heaven, but they have 8 million members. This is the book, Leaving the Witness, Finding a Life. Maybe we'll have to add that to Cult Book Club next year. Witnesses are forbidden to socialize outside the organization, another thing that makes it a cult. Higher education is discouraged. Educational abuse, usually something we find in cults. And questioning doctrine is an offense punishable by disfellowshipping or shunning, or what we call in cults excommunicating. Understandably, given the hermetically sealed nature of the sect and the shattering designation of apostate applied to those who dare question the organization, memoirs of departure have been few. A witness who leaves the cult stands to lose everything. And as Scora makes increasingly clear, she did survive a cult. Growing up in Vancouver, she was the child of an alcoholic father and distant mother, both of whom were Jehovah's Witnesses. Scora's grandmother was the agent of indoctrination, bringing the author and her sister to the Kingdom Hall for services. There, Scora was repeatedly warned that the end of the world was nigh, that witnesses alone would survive on an earthly paradise, and that all others would be consigned to what's called the common grave, extinction, or non-being. Though unusual in that she strayed schmexually and experienced disfellowshipping at a young age, Scora was reinstated when deemed properly repentant and fell quickly in step with established doctrine, ultimately marrying a devout witness for whom she felt little romantic or schmexual interest. When she and her husband eventually journeyed to China as missionaries, Skora was fully indoctrinated, as confident in my mission as a schmuicide schmommer. Ironically, given the primacy of love in most religious doctrines, it is often love, destabilizing, transformative, and messily human, that represents the greatest threat to extremist indoctrination. Knowing this, authoritarian organizations like the Jehovah's Witnesses exert tremendous effort to curtail the intermingling of believer with non-believer. Children of God was like that, and you can read how I get excommunicated at a very young age for sneaking out and doing the forbidden. And people are always like, wait, you got excommunicated from a Schmex cult for having Schmex? Yes, because with an outsider was the number one sin you could commit. After all, religious absolutism is no match for the handshake, the shared meal, the neighborly conversation, the kiss. So it was with Skora. In China, where the denomination is outlawed, she cultivated secular friendships for the first time in order to secretly proselytize. She went to dinners, invited people out for excursions, and gradually began to ask questions that come naturally to those not born in cults. How do you live your life? What is your religion about? Do you even believe in God? This is funny. It's not in my book, but my mom at some point wanted to move us. She made this whole plan to move us from Brazil to China because China was the only place on earth that you could live and still be in the children of God, but be allowed to like live as a single family and fellowship with the outside world. And I always say, like, when your parent is trying to move you to communist China to get away from the clutches of their religious organization, like, that's maybe when you know it's a cult. Ultimately, though, it was through an email correspondence with a man that Skora found the courage to court apostasy, focusing on contradictions in witness doctrines, its misogyny, and how its promotion of ignorance and lack of education undermines any sense of personal choice, rendering the word almost meaningless. When this email affair turned physical, Skora was finally able to extricate herself from both a loveless marriage and a life-consuming cult. Her memoir, most valuable as an artifact of how one individual can escape mind control, tracks this transformation from zealous believer to apostate. Skora's book, the bravery of which cannot be overstated, is an earnest one, fueled by a plucky humor and a can-do spirit that endures. Her tale, though an exploration of extremity, is highly readable and warm. However, her straightforward, unadorned prose, which many will admire, feels not so much intentionally accessible as the product of a mind still forming the ability to see the secular world, not one trained in the speculative that is the foundation of poetry and lyricism. Given the painfully restricted life she led until her 30s, this is entirely understandable, yet remains artistically limiting. Hence another reason why I used a co-writer, because you need to be able to connect the proper emotions to the stories that you are telling. Anyway, they say they hope she writes another memoir that probably goes more into detail of the deconstruction and what comes after it, which is often what they say about cult memoirs, because we're usually writing the story of what happened first. So for me, I wrote Uncultured, which is my story of joining or being born in a cult, leaving, joining a cult army and leaving. And then I have Un-American, which is more me looking at the process of indoctrination as a child and then deconstruction on the outside. Un-American isn't a published book, but if you go to my Patreon, you can watch me read it to you for 6 hours as a video book, and it's quite fun and intense. Anyway, yes, Jehovah's Witnesses is a cult. Yes, cult scholars are pretty much agreed on this. And yes, if you grew up in that, you should consider yourself a cult survivor and start deconstructing and unpacking, because we're pretty sure that in order to heal from cult and group abuse, you have to understand what happened to you. And one of the best ways to do that is to see it in parallel contexts. Hence, a book like Uncultured or like Leaving the Witness.